Washington and Spokane voters are famously independent, voting for the person and not the party. Voters want to know the person behind the policy. Join host Sulani Madsen as she interviews 2016 general election candidates for local, state, and federal office on the experiences that have shaped their lives. The Meet the Candidate series is sponsored as a community service by the Ponderosa Republican Women's Club, the Law Office of D.C. Cronin, and We Believe, We Vote. Now, here's your host, Sulani.
For this episode, our guest is Jeff Holy, who is running for House of Representatives, State House of Representatives in the 6th Legislative District. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Sulani. It's an honor to be here, and yes, we're in campaign season once again.
We are, and I'm asking everyone on the program to start with their description of what the job responsibilities are that they're running for.
Oh boy, that is a long conversation. I would have been able to give you just a simple answer before I ever got in office. The longer I'm there, it's the end of my second term, it seems that the more I figure out that we are responsible for, both directly and indirectly. It has to do with running the state as one of the three portions of government: judicial, executive, and legislative. We're the legislative branch. And the several members in the House are one chamber, Senate's the other chamber. We basically put together legislation that's going to address the needs of the public and attempt to apportion that through committees so that we vet things well, find out if our ideas are good ideas or not. And in a general 20,000-foot sense, that's what we end up doing here is passing legislation to address the betterment of our communities. And in my case, to attempt to allow business to grow, economic development in the state to occur, and some of the things I find that are very important from the perspective I bring. But there's more than that. We actually have the subcommittees out there that address things from public interest law groups out there to provide legal aid services, or we have the Sunshine Committee that I'm on also that has to do with attempting to allow things to be made transparent in government, at the same time protecting people and protecting financial interests of the people involved in the government itself. So there's a lot of different aspects that are really hands-on that have an effect. Also, and really most important to the people in my district, it has to do with being a true representative, having people come to me and say they have this problem with government or this need from government or government's in the way doing something that it shouldn't be doing, and have me run interference or give them an advocate or a voice in Olympia.
Okay, so the longer you've been there, the more you've discovered how the sausage is made. And
it truly is sausage. Sometimes the process is very unwieldy. The end result is palatable, but how you get there sometimes will change your appetite for what you're consuming.
I happen to like sausage and biscuits, sausage and gravy. So, what do you bring to this from your educational background? Where did you go to school?
Oh gosh. A couple of different junior colleges, Army back in the mid-1970s, right at the end of Vietnam. Came back and went to Washington State University. Got to the end of Washington State University, and of course that last semester, your senior year, you have that oh my God moment, and you have to figure out what's next.
Yes.
And so I decided I was going to try law school. And so I went to law school at Gonzaga, and it's interestingly enough, I ended up going to work for Spokane Police Department, passed the civil service test here as a vehicle to allow me to work graveyard patrol so that I could go to school during the day and pay cash as I was going through school. Interestingly enough, the police academy was every bit as much of an education as any of the formal educations that I had between undergraduate and law school. And my intent to leave really didn't happen. I was having so much fun being a cop in Spokane here that it is something I love doing. And when the time came to make a decision, I stayed with the department for a career, and I retired about 10 years ago here.
So your avocation turned into your vocation.
Not many people can say that, and I didn't realize it was until I got there. It was a grand adventure.
So you never practiced as an attorney, but I imagine that background is something that you've used.
Interestingly enough, You know, a Renaissance man is probably a far overstatement here, but before we had kids, the first couple of years back in the early 90s that I was licensed, I worked swing shift as a police officer and day shift at a law office up in South Hill.
Okay.
And retiring 10 years ago, I went to work with Rob Cossey here, doing the civil work in the office with Rob, and until about 4.5 years ago, when I got a phone call from Olympia saying, "Would you be interested?"
Okay. I know my mother has met your mother at some luncheon or other, so I think they had a nice visit.
Well, my mother's involved in Republican politics, and justifiably so.
What was your first job?
Paperboy for the Seattle PI, and as a morning paper. Interestingly enough, in high school, my first real job was as a box boy in a grocery store in Renton Highlands. During high school, I worked in a retirement home, Issaquah Villa, as maintenance. Mm-hmm. And my first job out of high school was working in a foundry in Renton, Pacific Car and Foundry, chipping and grinding winch casings during graveyard. You learn fairly quickly what you don't want to do for a living.
That's true. A lot of experience like that. You figure out whether you like to work with your hands, work with your head, work with people. And which did you decide was the one that's common to all of those?
I tell you what, it's a combination of both. It's not being stuck behind a desk, and it's not actually having to sit in an assembly line and do manual labor. It's things that allow you to get around a little bit and do a lot of everything.
A little of everything.
Yes.
Okay. So what was a kind of a turning point moment that turned you towards actually stepping up to run for office? Besides the phone call, I mean, why was that even an interest for you?
The phone call was an opportunity at that point, but I'd had this thought many years ago. Back, I started high school in '69, graduated in '73, and back then, just about all the kids in school, the popular thing was Students for Democratic Society or anti-war protesters. You know, the hippie movement was kind of big at the time, and I was part of a group called Young Americans for Freedom, which is a Republican youth movement, which is totally out of step with everybody around me. But I was aware enough about politics that when Kent Pullen on the east side of Seattle had his first run for the House back in '72, it would have been September '72. I'm a senior in high school, and he doorbelled our house, and he came and talked to me and my parents at the time, but I got a chance to talk to him individually, and I couldn't understand how he could actually be somebody that was a Republican and yet is involved in labor, representing labor on a negotiations team for Boeing in aerospace. It seemed to be a contradiction in terms. And he explained something to me that absolutely changed the dynamic I had of Republican versus Democrat or labor versus management. He said that labor without capital is unemployed. Capital without labor is unapplied. He says they're both sides of the same coin. He says neither side will admit it. And it's one of those things that just changed my perspective. And I followed him as he went from the House to the Senate and finally a King County executive before he died years ago. And there was a real attraction at that point to politics, watching what he was doing, that brought me along. And I always knew that sooner or later I wanted to be here.
Okay, so was House of Representatives the first office you ran for?
2010, I ran for county commissioner, and against Al French and Bonnie Mager. And
I do remember that now. I remember the signs. Yes.
I came so close. It just that was an education par excellence. We had 1/5 the money that the other two had, and didn't even have enough money for a mailer. And we put on such a ground game. We worked so hard. We came within 113 votes in the primary. So, I mean, that just goes to show you that the infantry aspect, that the ground game in politics is so important if you're running for office.
So you are doorbelling now.
I am.
And because you said you doorbelled in the Coug gear, so that...
Well, I don't. Well, now the secret's out.
Sorry.
But of course, it's funny how receptive people are. They see you wearing Coug gear. They're curious what you're doing at their front door.
Yeah. Probably a good way to start out.
It is.
Well, we're coming up on our 2 minutes, and I promise to give you the last couple of minutes to tell people why they should vote for you for this office.
This is something that is far beyond just a casual thought being there. You think you know what you know before you get there. I had a lot of time spent in Olympia. I spent a week to 3 week string session from the early 90s for Washington Council, Police and Sheriffs, and Fraternal Order of Police. And in 2011, I represented a client in a practice of law over there for about 6 weeks with a Department of Corrections contract. And I thought I had a handle of what's going on. When you get inside, it's a totally different animal. And you understand that it really is a team sport. And it's so important to be able to work with other people in caucus, but more importantly, be able to work with people across the aisle. And I think I've developed the relationships with both sides of the aisle here that I can actually accomplish something. And it's not just a partisan perspective or some sort of a philosophical tower that I'm in. We are very goal-oriented with what we're doing. Marcus Riccelli was number 2 right behind a bill that I was prime sponsor on for Lighthouse Industries here, which is manufacturing for the blind this last session here. We actually included them back in the state procurement process when they'd been forgotten years ago, and they were supposed to be there. Things like this that you can actually do a good job and not have the social issues get in the way of accomplishing what's necessary for your district here. I think I'm a good balance, and you look at my voting record and what I've accomplished so far, it speaks for itself.
Okay. Well, Jeff, I appreciate you coming in to visit. This helps you get out there kind of digital doorbelling with others in your district.
Thank you, Silani.
Thank you.
Meet the Candidate is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. The Meet the Candidate series is sponsored as a community service by the Ponderosa Republican Women's Club, the Law Office of D.C. Cronin, and We Believe, We Vote. All Meet the Candidate conversations are posted on our YouTube channel, posted as a podcast on our website, and will be featured in our 24/7 live stream. Find us at SpokaneTalksOnline.com.